the truth about pre-marriage counseling. We have on this show within the Happy Strong Family Studio. We've talked about this in various ways in past episodes. This episode, we're going to really unpack the notion of pre-marriage counseling. And to that, we have our dedicated guest for today's live stream with Sister Hina Mirza. Sister Hina, how are you today?
Assalamualaikum.
Walaikum.
Alhamdulillah, I'm good.
Good, good. So your this is a remote live stream. You're dialing in from your home office. Now let's discuss a little bit about your background, just to kind of give a little bit of heft and veracity to what we're about to discuss. You are a registered psychotherapist with a master's in counseling psychology. You already provide family and marriage counseling through your practice in Oakville, and you've been a recognized guest with many Islamic organizations, including our own. So, with that much gravitas, that much
SubhanAllah.
credibility, how do we unpack this? How do we unpack this, Sister Hina? Like, where do we go from here? It's such a wide topic, and I cannot stress enough that it's been there's been a continual kind of picking this apart in various episodes. So I'll let you lead the discussion. It's all about pre-marriage counseling. Where do we go from here?
I think one of the starting points is the importance of recognizing the institution of marriage, coming from an Islamic perspective, coming from a culture perspective, a society perspective. It's the foundation of everything. This is where it all begins. Marriage. This is where it begins. Our family life, our individual happiness, our children that come from the marriage, and even our parents and siblings and our communities. This is probably one of the most important, no, not probably, this is the most important relationship that we are in as adults. And, I want to stress the emphasis of that importance, because when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created relationships first, the very first relationship that was created was between a man and a woman as husband and wife. So when Allah put such emphasis that, when in his infinite wisdom, Allah could have created a mother and a child, or brothers, or, just absolutely anything. Any relationship could have been created first, but Allah chose the relationship between a man and a woman. And when we look at that model of marriage in our society today, it's lost all of its meaning. There are so many people in unhealthy, unhappy marriages. It's become almost devastating. And then, you hear about the other side of it, that, the divorce rates are rising, and now Muslims are being impacted because, some like odd decade or 2 decades ago, you wouldn't hear as much of divorce in the Muslim community, but that trajectory is completely changing. So when we sit together, with therapists, imams, community leaders, when we're thinking about, okay, well, where's our ummah going? Where's our community going? This is something that comes up very often. So my role as a therapist, working with families and couples, I used to see a lot of couples coming in for marriage counseling, and you'll hear this a lot, that there's a myth that when you go to marriage counseling, it leads to divorce. The reason why marriage counseling is so tough on couples is because they've come in too little, too late. And when you come in with that level of hurt, emotional injury, there have been so many problems, repeated patterns of broken hearts, and just moments of disappointment and resentment and rejection. No one can fix that for you. No one can come into this, as statistics show that couples come in for marriage counseling 6 years later than they should have come in. And that's a long time of hurt. So when you look at that relationship model and say, okay, well, if you had come in 6 years ago, well, why not 16 years ago? Or why not, when you first got into the relationship? And I think that's where the birthplace of pre-marriage counseling first came in, that if we could just help people making better decisions, having better, healthier communication, sort of get them onto the right path before the problems even started. Now, mind you, having said that, this is not a guarantee that marriage counseling or pre-marriage counseling prevents problems in a marriage. It absolutely does not. Those of you who are married know that 100% of us are going to have problems in our marriage. But that's part of the, the experience of dunya. This is not Jannah. You're not getting the perfect wife or the perfect husband. But what it does do is it offsets anticipated problems. Like it makes it a little bit easier to deal with certain issues, certain common themes that we all experience in relationships and marriage. It makes it a lot easier for us to deal with them and to approach them and work through them.
Good point. Good point. Now, the whole reason we do this live stream, this weekly show, is to really discuss the hard topics that maybe are not discussed within the home, the typical kind of taboo subjects that are maybe not even discussed within your own circle. And I think automatically, rightfully or wrongfully, Sister Hina, um, and almost by default, I think it's just maybe something to do with human nature, something to do with the ego, that even if you kind of string together a sentence with the word counseling or the word therapist, anywhere in that sentence, whether it's the start of the sentence or somewhere in the middle or even the end of said sentence, you're automatically kind of looked at, all of a sudden you're looked at with like, the eyes are kind of drawn in and you're like, oh, okay. So you're one of those, you're having
What's
trouble.
wrong
Oh,
with you?
what's wrong with you? Yes, you took the words out of my mouth. So with that, look, we always say, you know, it's already hard enough to have a life challenge. It's already hard enough to be adulting or to be an adult. And as you said, marriage is the most challenging part of adulting. I don't want to say the hardest, but it's definitely a challenge. And you put it so beautifully in very kind of real terms, for any Muslim, for that matter. This is not Jannah. This is the dunya. This is the world. And with the world, even the messengers had troubles with their spouses when it went both ways. So that all being said, tell us a little bit about your process, or what the process of pre-marriage counseling would entail. On past episodes, I've talked at length, and I am not only an advocate, but I'm also an ally of the concept of pre-marriage. I always kind of draw parallels, and I draw out specific attention to the Catholic faith community. If you're a Catholic, more often than not, you'll go to the priest, and you'll be like, "Hey, we want to get married," and the priest will literally hand you over a toy baby doll and be like, "Okay, you are now effectively married over the course of 2 weeks. Here's your baby. Take care of your baby and see how this relationship works out." That's an actual workshop that's done across many Catholic churches. Not that I'm advocating it here and now, but it's one example. So how does this work? What exactly are your kind of roles and responsibilities within pre-marriage counseling? Would it be for someone like, would it be for a young couple, a couple that's literally maybe 2 months out from getting married, someone who's engaged? Like, how would this work, Sister?
Okay, so I think if you want to kind of look at the importance of pre-marriage counseling and what it's offering, I want us to take a
Mhm.
couple of steps back.
Sure.
You're absolutely right, Brother Stack. Like the word counseling in our culture automatically implies there's something wrong.
Mhm.
And the number of young adults that I have in therapy who will say, I don't know if I should tell my future partner if I've been in the therapy, but the trajectory of that is changing. Now people are becoming a lot more comfortable. It's actually becoming kind of cool to have a therapist. And because of that change in language and that change of approach towards counseling,
Mhm.
alhamdulillah, it's made a huge difference when it comes to subjects like pre-marriage counseling. Now, if you have somebody who's looking to get married or who's looking to get engaged and they offer this up to their partner and they say, how do you feel about pre-marriage counseling, or we should do some marriage courses,
Right.
now it's a lot more normalized than it was maybe perhaps 10 years ago. So alhamdulillah, that we're headed in the right direction. And
Good.
we owe that a lot to the overall change and our overall approach to mental health as well. I've noticed tremendously in my own career that, at the beginning, how people would be, and I'm not even kidding, would be paying like, can I pay you cash because I don't want therapy to show up on my credit card bill? Like it's so hush
Right.
hush. Like I don't want anybody to know. to now, as I said, like, people will tag me in their Instagram posts saying, hashtag my therapist. And I'm like, okay, alhamdulillah. So that I'm super grateful that dialogue has changed overall about mental
Hmm.
health and the approach to counseling.
Right.
But when it comes in particular to subjects like pre-marriage counseling, I'm going to break it up into three main areas for the
Please.
audience. The
Please.
first part is before you even meet somebody. So since we're talking just today about pre-marriage counseling or marriage, the starting of marriage counseling, it's even before you started looking is when you should actually be in therapy, because you want to have a good idea about yourself. And I think if that's the backbone of all my work in my marriage counseling, whether
Hmm.
you are single, looking for somebody, engaged, early marriage, late marriage, the very first approach that I take in my work is let's work on yourself. Let's learn some self-awareness skills. Who are you as a person? What makes you tick? What are your triggers? What are your responses to your triggers? So just really, and it's sad because a lot of us, we really don't even know who we are.
Mm.
And if you don't know who you are, and now you're getting into a relationship with someone else, obviously you can see that how that can become really explosive. So
Right. Right.
very first step is get yourself into counseling even before you start the process,
Mm.
because that's going to give you that edge of walking into that the arena of looking for a partner with
Right.
self-awareness and knowing who you are and what your limitations are. That's you, now you're sitting on a gold mine. The second thing is compatibility counseling. So
Mm.
a lot of the times couples who are considering each other for marriage will say, I don't know, is this the right decision? Are we on the right path? Do we see a future? Now, this is where it gets, what you were saying, like, oh, it gets a little bit controversial, because of course, alhamdulillah, as Muslims, we believe that Allah has in his divine wisdom decreed what is good for us. So what's the role of compatibility counseling? Like,
Mm.
if I'm meant to get hurt, I will. And so this is where it gets a little bit confusing for couples, where they say, well, is it appropriate even for us to engage in something called compatibility counseling? So I'll tell you this. In compatibility counseling, your therapist is not sitting there saying, yes, get married. No, you shouldn't get married. It's not coming from a place of higher above that I know more than you know, so I'm going to look at you somehow magically and tell you whether you're good for each other. That's absolutely not what it is.
Okay.
What it really does is that it just like in that particular type of counseling, we're putting to the forward modules and experiences and questions that we're saying, okay, this is a conversation that you need to have. And once you've had that conversation, how do you feel about it now? When
Mm.
you learn and you're asking tough questions to your partner, saying that, these are my values, these are the things that I'm going to stand by. This is where I am today, and this is what I want. It just opens up the conversation. And because you're in that space where you both know that, hey, we're here to see whether we're compatible with each other, then it's a very open, frank space to ask questions that otherwise couples usually don't ask each other. And it is fairly new. I mean, I haven't had a whole lot of people who have specifically said we're interested in compatibility counseling, but the people that have come together and decided that they want to engage in it have benefited tremendously. I mean, subhanallah, there are couples who decided afterwards that we don't think this is a good idea, and I've had feedback from them individually afterwards saying, I didn't even realize that this was important to me, and it was an important value to me that I couldn't have compromised on, or it would have been a huge problem later on. So I guess it's just, it's a place where you're raw and open, and you're able to ask your partner, or, get to know your partner in a way that you perhaps would have never known over tea in the living room, or even, as like a chaperone dinner or a chaperone conversation. It's not something that would have come up. And I've
Right.
noticed a lot of couples who were previously married and are now looking to get remarried, or were divorced and, they're starting over again, feel the need to have these conversations because they're obviously coming in with a lot of baggage and pain. So it's a great safe space to have an honest, open conversation. And then the
Right.
last one is what we were actually here talking about, is actually pre-marriage counseling, that, I've met somebody, we are engaged, or we're looking to get married. And this, by the way, like the skill set that you learn in pre-marriage counseling is applicable to any couple. Like, even if you've been married for 15 years, or, you've got a more mature marriage, the tools and the skill set that you learn is applicable across the board. It's just that you should be in that space of wanting to know and wanting to learn and grow. But alhamdulillah, if you start it before married, like if it's in the first year of marriage, you're going to benefit the most.
Yeah. And I think, Sister Hina, it's really akin to, it's not all that far off from, again, as Muslims, we have to balance both deen and dunya, right? So just to kind of put it in the dunya context, as a professional, no matter what stream of a professional you are, there's always some form of professional development, right? As a professional, you don't want to, be stuck with a skill set that's maybe 10 years old. You want to continually refine your own thought process, the way you learn, the way you grow as a professional. So as a person, why don't we have the skills and, as you say, the tool set to become a better person? I think that's definitely a lost art. Now, coming back to the deen perspective, even the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would, if you looked at his time as a prophet, he focused at least the first 12, 14 years of Islam on character. It wasn't a series of pronouncements. This is what the Quran says. The Quran never banned drinking as within the first 30, 60, or even 90 days. It actually banned it. I may be off on the timeline here, but I think it was maybe around the 14th year or 15th year. Why? Because the divine thinking and divine wisdom was that focus on your character first. Build yourself up to be a proper, acting, behaving Muslim first, thinking Muslim first, right? So maybe just if there's any kind of takeaways from that for the audience to ponder and think about, just add some color commentary there. We do have a question from producer Kashif, who is always here behind the scenes in the video production booth within the studios. So producer Kashif, over to you, please.
Absolutely. Jazakallah khair for the conversation. Great conversation, mashallah. Just a follow-up question. So as you were saying, alhamdulillah, like the tides are sort of changing on mental health education. Still a lot of work to be done, but there is a lot more awareness now than there was before. But I find naturally with awareness comes some anxiety and fear for people. Like it becomes natural. And some of the terms that we never used to hear before, like borderline personality disorder, narcissism, these type of things have become very common. We saw in the Johnny Depp trial, for example, how two people were so in love, things were amazing, but there were some undiagnosed things there that made it like a horrific experience, eventually marriage, right? So people have become fearful of this, and I often, when people are often told, "Oh, go to premarital counseling," will pre-marriage counseling actually help identify some of these red flags? And would you go to someone that, hey, maybe someone has some underlying mental conditions here that you need to be cautious of, or is that that's not the purpose of pre-marriage counseling?
So yes and no. When you're in, how I was saying initially, like even before you meet somebody, it's important for us to go through individual counseling. I think those should be the areas where we identify what our own shortcomings are, and we all have them, alhamdulillah. One of the key things to remember here is that your inner child wounds will get exaggerated, or like they will start surfacing when you're in an intimate partner relationship. And for a lot of Muslims, or a lot of practicing Muslims, that doesn't happen because we're not out there dating. So we don't really realize how other people can trigger us until we're actually locked into a relationship or into marriage. And when those inner child wounds start showing up, now we're confused because I've never felt this before, or this aspect of jealousy or anger or frustration or whatever have you, right? Like you don't realize it until you're actually in the relationship, which is why individual counseling, even before you get married, is so crucial, because it helps you unpack and uncover a lot of those things, including inner child wounds. People who have major mental health markers, or they are dealing with major mental health issues, they're not just going to show up in marriage. So if you're talking about somebody who has borderline personality, or anybody who has narcissistic personality disorder, and anything that has to do with their mental health, it's not just all of a sudden going to pop up when they get married. It's probably something they've been living with or struggling with all their lives, or at least in their adult life. And when you kind of go do this individual counseling process, that's when the stuff surfaces and you realize, now, is it manageable? Yeah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Now, a lot of individual mental health issues are manageable. but they're manageable when you know about them and you know how to treat them and how to work on them. So people with mental health concerns can lead healthy, happy married lives. Yes, there are challenges, but then there are challenges always. If it's not a mental health challenge, it could be a physical health challenge or a financial challenge. SubhanAllah, that's just, that the list just continues. So for what, Brother Kashif, what you were asking, can you prevent that, or can that become a red flag? I don't want to say in like a blanket statement that, you can find out if the person has narcissistic personality disorder and just choose not to marry them. What I want to speak to is the people who actually might be struggling with narcissistic personality disorder or any other mental health marker, and tell them that if you get help, you can actually be in a healthy, happy relationship. And it can not just, it's not just the person who's on the receiving end of it that's suffering. The person who's actually dealing with the mental health concern is also struggling and suffering. So all of that can be avoided. In terms of, now, okay, so let's step aside from the major mental health concerns and talk about, this is just characteristically, a lot of us deal with anger issues. A lot of us deal with suppressing our thoughts and, not being able to communicate, or withdrawing in times of conflict and confrontation. We're not the kind of people who are conflict avoiders or people pleasers. Yes, absolutely. Pre-marriage counseling is the place for you to unpack these challenges that you deal with as a person, and then learn the tools that it takes to be in that safe relationship with your partner. If, for example, and people pleasing is a very common thing that we have, at least coming from our culture. So if you are a people pleaser and you have been all your life trying to make other people happy and you don't know what you want, when you get into a marriage, almost you'll see this happening a lot in therapy. I see this so often, is that when people get into a relationship, they somehow feel like this other person is going to heal my broken parts, rather than understanding that this is probably the place where you're going to get triggered the most. So we have this unrealistic expectation of marriage altogether, because we think that all the pain and the hurt and the suffering that we may have endured in our childhood or in our young adulthood, all of that's magically going to go away when we get married, and this person is going to make me whole, or they're going to make me feel, amazing, or they're going to make me feel great, and marriage is just going to fix all of it. But it's not. You can't put that kind of expectation on another person. That's not fair. If you're getting married, you need to understand that whatever you're bringing into the relationship, all the broken parts of you and all your experiences and all your challenges, you're getting married to somebody who's also bringing in all of that into the relationship. So now what happens in pre-marriage counseling is we're just raising awareness. First and foremost, it's just raising awareness of what you're walking in with. What are your childhood traumas? And I want to use that word carefully. So, your childhood experiences, what are you walking in with? And the key here is that in pre-marriage counseling, you're learning to soothe yourself. Once you recognize this is who I am, these are the things, like let's choose anger, right? Like some people have issues with controlling their temper. When you recognize that, you have the tools to work on your anger. And what I call is the cool thing about pre-marriage counseling is the shared language, because the tools that at least like what I'm teaching, it's a shared language experience. So you kind of, you can say to your partner, I'm having a high trigger moment. I think I need to step away. And then when you talk about that, your partner's like, oh, okay, I know what my partner's talking about. So I need to let them detach for this time so that they can go take care of themselves. That's why it's so healthy and helpful to get into pre-marriage counseling before you are in a relationship, or when you're in a relationship with someone, because you are going to share this incredible language with one another, and you're going to understand that we come in as individuals, we bring in our experiences and our baggage, and we are the ones responsible for soothing, and we are the ones who are responsible for taking care of our own needs and our own happiness. Because when two happy people are in a relationship, it makes for a happy home, a happy relationship. But when you have two broken people who are are unable to soothe and just triggering one another, that's the birthplace of a poor marriage, or a marriage that's going to head downhill.
So, Sister Hina, I think I also want to kind of dial it back, because I want to go back a few steps and really emphasize that, like you say, in terms of childhood moments or an upbringing, I think it's all, whether it's, I don't want to kind of put it as a Western philosophy or the Western world approach. I think in terms of a global approach now, as humans, we are kind of pre-built to understand. You go to school, you go to university or college, and then basically you become some sort of professional, or you go to the trades. Basically, you grow up as a kid, go to school, get to work. Nowhere in that process, nowhere is there really a portion where it's like, hey, grow up, reflect, self-reflect, understand who you are as a person. You're laughing because this is so true, isn't it? Take some time out for yourself. Understand what are your pain points. Understand what can make you potentially upset. Understand how you may be, this type of person around this type of person. Understand who you are as a daughter or as a son, or as a potential husband or a potential wife, or a brother or a sister. Nowhere in their growing up process, I think globally speaking, even regardless of culture, whether you're Canadian or any other culture for that matter, are we kind of given any education to understand who we are as an individual. So, Sister Hina, I mean, in terms of understanding oneself, that's why I kind of want to dial it back. What can we do? What are some of the principles? I mean, not that this is all of a sudden
A self-development podcast.
self-development podcast, but I think it's so true, right? When you say two happy people coming together produces, hopefully, a happy relationship.
Mhm.
How can that person be happy in the first place? You know, even in my own circle, there are people who are going through depression, and we continually say on the show, no one should suffer in silence. If you need help, get it. Whether it's through the university, whether it's through the school system, we've had potential school board trustee candidates, and that person was like 100%. Mental health, mental well-being is the top priority, or should be the top priority. There's just not enough resources, and there was a whole podcast, whole session dedicated just to that. But everywhere you turn, mental health, mental well-being is being addressed. But let's take it from a kind of a self-discovery, self-assessment approach. What can you do so that you can walk into a healthy relationship, like you're saying already?
Okay, so I like the way that you were sort of starting to talk about this, that globally we don't have this concept of self-reflection. There's no in our timeline of excuse me, growth and development, we don't have a phase of let's ponder and reflect. But one of the really cool things I like to bring up when people talk about this is, what was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam doing in Cave Hira? Pondering, reflecting on the self, asking himself those tough questions. So it's in the sunnah of Islam, and it's in the, it's in our own practice as believers, that we need to take time out of the hustle and bustle of our daily routines, and excuse me, isolate ourselves from everything. And when I say isolate, naturally, like, sometimes you don't have the physical capacity to isolate. But one of the most beautiful times of reflection is Salatul Fajr, for example, right? Like when you wake up in the morning and you're sort of, there's no hustle and bustle of the day, and you're by yourself, and to think and to contemplate and to ask. And if you're not, and I know now we've completely segued out of premarital counseling, but it is still a very big part of it. It's human development. If you are not spending time reflecting, then you're doing a disservice to yourself. It's
Agreed.
not, I use this term in therapy a lot, is that you're not a human doing, you're a human being. And you need to take time every day. If it's not available every day, if you're living that life of clockwork, the minute you get up till the minute you go to bed, you're constantly just, in the action of doing something, you're not taking breaks and you're not stopping. That's a huge disservice to life. And what kind of quality of life are you living then? Whether you go on a walk to contemplate, whether it's after Salah that you're contemplating, whether you're taking time out during your drive to work or back, or, whether you're taking your children somewhere and dropping them off or whatnot, there has to be a time. And if it's not there, you need to build it, to create space to think and reflect and ask yourself questions. A lot of people are actually living life like this. They've got blinders on, and they are avoidant of what is actually happening. And when they're avoiding things, what do you see? See things like marriage crumbling, because I just don't want to look at the problem. If I avoid it, it's just going to disappear. It's not. It's about raising children and raising youth, and then realizing 15, 16, 17 years into it that your children are not, you don't recognize them, or there's no connection that you have with that child. It's about losing your own parents and not having a relationship. It's not about not excelling in your career. Why is all this stuff happening? Why are we losing all types of relationships? Is because we just feel like if I keep going, if I keep doing something, I'll be okay. No, you're not going to be just okay by being in the act of constantly performing and doing. The way you're going to be okay is when you're going to stop and take those breaks and do some reflection. And why not? It's from the Prophet's salatu wassalam sunnah to reflect and to ask those deeper questions, and to if I'm not happy in my marriage, for example, but why am I not happy? What's missing? What needs to happen more? And so the answer becomes, eventually, for people who are not contemplating and reflecting, the answer becomes, well, I should just end the marriage. It's not working.
That's it exactly. And I'm so glad. And believe me, for the audience, this is not a pre-rehearsed show. It's completely live, it's completely off the cuff, right? And I'm so glad that you kind of picked up on that. And that's exactly where I was hoping we'd go in terms of the conversation. And even if you look at, from a deen perspective, and as Muslims, we try to ground ourselves in as much deen as possible. But what is the first verse of the Quran? It's when Archangel Gabriel came down and hugged the Prophet so tight and said, read 3 times. If you look at that verse alone, the full verse, there's mention of to read, ikra, there's mention of the pen, kalam, and there's also a mention of to learn. And if you look at the full verse, why is it so important to learn? And then I'll just extrapolate from there: to learn, to ponder, to self-reflect. There is a hadith, and it's to the extent of, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if this is one of the Sahaba asking, if I were to stay up all night and be in tahajjud, that prayer that's after Isha, you get up 2-3 in the morning, all night, and be in this prayer, or if I were to learn about my deen, which one is more important? And believe it or not, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, may surprise you, maybe not, it's more valuable, it's more rewarding in the eyes of Allah, of our creator, to actually stay up all night and learn. So let's extrapolate from that. Why is it important to learn? To learn about yourself, to learn about your religion, to learn about anything at large, just to kind of educate yourself, comes back full circle. Now, Sister Hina, there is a question from the audience, and there's been a number of questions that I've kind of just been chomping away at us. I'm trying to get presence onto the screen here, so I'll leave it to producer Kashif to voice those questions, and we can take it from there.
Yes, Jazakallah khair. So yeah, there are some questions. We put out a call for questions on our Instagram, Happy Strong Family Instagram, on our WhatsApp. So some questions came in previously. There is one live that came in through the stream, actually a few. So I'll ask those first, just in case the folks are watching live. And I'm not going to display them on the screen just in case there's like conflict because the names show, but I'll just ask it. So if someone wants just Islamic nikah but doesn't want to get a marriage license, is the question. And I think maybe this one, obviously that's all they wrote, but maybe there's other, like if someone's not being completely upfront, or if they're not being honest, or they don't want you to meet their parents, stuff like that. Like, are these red flags, I guess?
Okay. So the red flags are plenty, and they could range from a legal perspective, like I just want an Islamic nikah, I don't want to legally get married, to I don't want to meet your parents, or it could be anything. And when you do individual counseling, as I said, like the pre-marriage, before you meet somebody, there's a whole section where I actually work with the person to say, okay, what are your red flags? What are the things that are valuable to you, and what would it mean to you that this doesn't seem safe or this doesn't seem right? Let's say, for example, a potential partner comes in and says, I don't want to do a legal marriage, I just want to do an Islamic nikah. Well, to one person, that could be a huge red flag. What are you trying to hide? What are you trying to do? To another person, it could be like, yeah, you're right. I don't, who wants the secular marriage and all that it comes with? I believe in Islam. I'm a Muslim. I want to do an Islamic nikah, and I'm happy with that. So no two people are going to have the same type of red flags. based on your interactions and your life experiences, you're going to come up with your own list of values and what is important to you and what you quantify as red flags. And then you are going to look out for those. Are there certain types of red flags that I would say are, just for everybody, like just generally, these are red flags that you should be aware of? Yeah, honesty, integrity, character. These are extremely important if you are talking to somebody for marriage and you notice a lot of discrepancy in what they're saying, if they're being dishonest about a lot of things, if their dealings are not fair, if they're being very secretive about themselves or meeting you or meeting your family members. Of course, these are red flags, but then come back to the way that Islam has taught us about courtship and meeting people. Yes, we always, I always get this question all the time. Well, things have changed now and there's apps and there's dating and there's this and what's halal dating and all of this stuff. And you're like, okay, alhamdulillah, let's just go back to the basic principles of Islam. Yes, you are allowed to get to know the person before you get married to them. There's nothing wrong with that. And there is a framework in which we are supposed to be doing that. And the framework does not exist to cramp your style. It actually exists to protect you and to keep you safe from emotional injury or hurt or, for things to escalate very quickly. Anybody who's been in a relationship in its early stages knows that it's very quick and very easy for things to start becoming intimate between two people. And the closeness starts increasing when they are not, when they're just sort of left on their own, whether that's physically in a room together or whether it's in chat with somebody. So, all of those dimensions definitely add complications to meeting somebody in the art of courtship in 2022 or Islamic courtship, we should say. But the key thing, and coming back to that red flags, is that when you know what you are okay with and what your values are, then it's easy to identify what you're not okay with. So it's kind of like the reverse of that, like these are the things that I value and are important to me. So these are the things that I'm not okay with. It makes that conversation a lot easier.
Jazakallah khair. So speaking of red flag, I just noticed the word red flag in another question, so I'll just skip over that one. So this came in through our Instagram channel.
Okay.
If one of the potential spouses refuses to go to premarital counseling, is this an immediate red flag, or can that somewhat be expected due to the overall resistance and stigma some people have towards therapy and letting strangers in to discuss they cut off there, but I think it was discuss their private lives.
Okay. So remember, I think that this is podcast is super important because we're trying to get the word out there. Pre-marriage counseling comes in two different parts. One part is uncovering your own self and discovering your own needs in a relationship and your own challenges and how to offset them or how to work with them. The other part is learning skills. The skill part of it is something that is standardized. So there's the main areas that I cover when I do pre-marriage counseling for couples about learning and development is self-work. So again, working on yourself, understanding yourself better. Attachment theory, how you learn to get into a healthy attachment, a healthy relationship with somebody. And that's the whole love part, building a good relationship, the health, the love, the feel-good feeling of it. Then obviously the buzzword communication, teaching couples how to communicate in a healthy way and understanding that not everything needs to be communicated about or not everything needs to be talked out till fajr. Really teaching the art of healthy communication. We talk about conflict resolution, things that you are important to discuss and overcome, and then finally decision making. Now, when a partner says to you, I don't want to go to pre-marriage counseling, you want to know why. Like, what's the reason? Why are you avoiding it? If they're avoiding it because they don't want to air their dirty laundry or they don't want to talk about their private life, then demystifying that and saying, well, that's not exactly what it always is. It's also about learning and development and learning skills to help us do what we're doing, getting into our relationship, helping us learn the skills so that we can be in a healthier and a stronger and a better relationship. If your partner outrightly says, no, I don't need to learn anything, I'm already good where I am, would you consider that a red flag? Probably, because we are always in a state of growth and development. It's something we were actually talking about earlier in the podcast as well, is that you're always growing. What's that statement that they say, that if you're not growing, you're dead? You're always in a state of growth. And we know this because, a few years into the marriage, you're going to become a parent. You might move out of the house, or people might move countries or whatever. Like all these dynamic changes that occur in our life create opportunities for growth. If you're getting married to somebody who is against growth, I think that's a bigger red flag than them saying, I don't want to do pre-marriage counseling. By the way, it's not necessary that you have to come in one-on-one with a therapist and work with them. That's a different type of experience, but you can also attend a ton of courses. Mashallah, so many Muslim organizations are working on getting the word out about issues related to intimacy and love and connection and healthy marriages. So you can always sign up for something and just watch lectures on online. You can watch stuff on YouTube. All of it is beneficial. In fact, we just recorded at Happy Strong Families. I just recorded a 4-module set on pre-marriage counseling, and just like the Christian community and mashallah the Malaysian community, how they're making it mandatory for couples to attend some form of counseling before getting married. We're working, or at least I'm really pushing and advocating that this is necessary for us here in Canada as well. Nobody should be getting into a marriage in this day and age without some form of learning or education. And if I ever get like people pushing back, and parents or anybody saying, well, why are we putting these thoughts in their heads and whatnot, I always say to them that imagine putting your child in a car and letting them drive without teaching them. Would you ever do that? Like, would you ever hand your child a set of keys to your car and say, figure it out? You'll get on the road, you'll figure it out.
Right.
No. Well, absolutely, you would never. You would initially sit with them and talk to them about the functioning of the car, the safety, and like I always tell my children, your Ayatul Kursi first, all these preventive methods of safeguarding and protecting yourself. And does it mean that just because we taught them how to drive or we gave them all the tips and tools of being safe, does that mean that, God forbid, like there's no accidents on the road? No, there are. But alhamdulillah, with safer drivers on the road, the probability reduces, and inshallah, may Allah protect all of us and our children. That's what pre-marriage counseling is for. It's
Great example.
Help you protect yourself from the general, like if you're not gonna, it's to help you protect yourself from the road bumps and the general things that we know that are out there, and to help you navigate them better rather than just getting out there and saying, okay, I'll figure it out when I get there.
Great example. Great analogy, Sister Hina. Great analogy. Producer Kashif, do we have more questions in the queue, please?
Yeah, there's a few more. I think a lot of them were answered, the ones that came in from Instagram previously. I guess sorry, I'm just looking for it now. Here's a small screen I have to scroll through.
No worries. This is the magic of a live stream.
That's right. So it was asking about, so this one here. So if I have private insurance for psychotherapy, would that include pre-marriage counseling, assuming provider is approved by insurance?
Oh, okay.
Yes. So when you go in for individual counseling, what you talk about in your session is private, it's confidential, and it could, it is a big part of mental health, getting into a new relationship, navigating the transitional changes. So yes, the short answer to that is that if your insurance provider is covering psychotherapy, then you can go to a registered psychotherapist and inshallah proceed with whatever type of counseling that you're looking for, and it would be covered.
Okay, so Producer Kashif, let's make sure that we get Sister Hina's contact information up on the screen before the end of the broadcast. And it was a billing question, so we hope we address that billing question just in terms of coverage.
Perfect. And yeah, so most of these questions have been answered. So so do both people have to do counseling together, or is it individual? How many sessions can parents attend? And there's a follow-up question that someone WhatsApped me right now. Like, you recommended that everyone should maybe do individual counseling also. So when it comes time for pre-marriage counseling with your partner, do you recommend it's the same counselor that one of the partners has been seeing for a while, or should it be someone sort of new that for both of them is someone new and has that perspective? Or
that's a heavy question. And Hina, both you and I think we're both kind of from that Desi or from that South Asian background. So now we have to kind of shift gears and talk up culture, which is never a easy conversation to have, but let's give it a try. Culturally speaking, I think we, and you kind of touched upon it, halal dating versus not halal dating? What is halal dating anyways, or halal courtship? What are the guardrails on that, if any at all? That's probably a whole separate podcast in and of itself. But culturally speaking, to educate yourself, to go into these sessions by yourself. But then what about the parents? And I think the question is there, can parents be part of this process? I can already kind of hear in that kind of very kind of bad accent, oh beta, what are you doing? Why are you in this therapy? Why are you doing this to yourself? You don't need it. You're okay, beta, you're okay.
We don't need counseling.
I can already hear it. So Sister Hina, please, like, how do we unpack this, and how do we, again, the whole point of it, all joking aside, is just to remove the stigma. How can we remove the stigma? And to do that communication, how can we be as inclusive as possible? Are parents allowed? Are they not allowed? Obviously, maybe for confidentiality reasons. Like, what are some of the guidelines here, please?
So, yes, culturally, it's still a little awkward and uncomfortable to bring up pre-marriage counseling, but that's going to be changing very quickly. The
Good.
more young people are bringing this up as a topic of conversation, as I said, now it's actually considered really cool to have a therapist. And that, from where we were before to now, how much change we've seen. And the same thing's going to happen with pre-marriage counseling as well. You're going to start seeing younger people talking about, with their partner, potentially saying, hey, how do you feel about therapy? And the person saying, yeah, I have my own therapist. And all of a sudden that becoming a part of the conversation that, yeah, we both have our own therapist, and how has it benefited you? So I can see how that conversation trend is going to start changing over the years. When it comes to the concept of pre-marriage counseling and like the taboos surrounded around it, the couple itself, I feel that the newer generation that is looking to get married today is very enthusiastic and open to the idea of learning. And that's, as I said, that's like authentic Islamic tradition, right? Like the
Yes.
tradition of growth and development. So the beautiful thing. Now, when I think the original question was, do I do individual first and then do I do a couple later? Coming from a therapist, every single one of us should be in therapy for ourselves. We should be, because nowadays our lives are so complicated and complex, and there's so many layers and layers and layers. And yes, if you have a great support system through friends and family, that's wonderful. But therapy, if it's not going to help you, it's definitely not hurting you either. It's a great space to just be yourself, and a space that you open up kind of like a dimension where you get to be present with yourself, and kind of like talking about the cave of Hira and self-reflection. So it's a safer place to self-reflect, and it doesn't end at self-reflection. It leads to growth and development. So individually, each of us should be using a healthy space for growth and development. And when we decide to introduce another person into our space, it's wonderful to open that up to another, get into pre-marriage counseling and move that into couples counseling. But there are a lot of people that I know that still have their individual therapists and might come and see me for couples counseling, or they might be seeing me for individual counseling, and they'll have a different therapist for couples. But just to clarify, I know a lot of people here think because it's on TV or something, like, there's like this common understanding that you go into therapy every single week. It's not like that. In fact, when people come in for therapy, it's not like, I don't want people to sit here thinking, oh my God, if I do marriage counseling or individual counseling, I'm like taking out hours and hours and money and all this stuff comes into play. No, it's really initially, it's a little bit about reflection and growth. And then when you're on that path, you can see your therapist as on a need-to basis. And marriage counseling is exactly the same. When you get into pre-marriage counseling, you start yourself on the right path, and then you go in for tune-ups and check-ins. And if you come across issues that are unsolvable and you need a third party to have a conversation with you to help you guys navigate, that's what that's really about at the end of the day. Now, the parental dimension of, hey, is it okay to bring my parents into marriage counseling? I don't recommend it. Only because now it goes from being pre-marriage or marriage counseling to family therapy. If you are dealing with a particular family issue, the important thing is to talk about it with your therapist and see how you can navigate it best. And if in that conversation, the decision is that, it would help to have mom come into counseling, maybe. If dad, that's a very individual conversation. It may need to be family counseling, may not. But I think the very first conversation needs to happen between you and your therapist, or you and your marriage counselor, or your couples counselor, to decide what the role of parents can be. But if you want to get ahead of the game and you want to have these conversations with your parents and, identify what issues may or may not arise. Again, I'm doing a shameless plug in here. Happy Strong Family and I, we actually did an entire section on the in-laws and how you can build a marriage around the family system. So you're not on your marriage island by yourself and then you've got your own family or your parents. No, it shouldn't be like that. Actually, having family is a beautiful thing. So integrating family in is it's a wonderful experience. And when the way we've shot that in-law session, it's a great way to get your parents engaged and saying, I want us to be able to talk about this stuff. And even when I do live events, even in those, it's open to parents for them to attend as well. In fact, why not? The more people who get the message of what it takes to be in a healthy marriage, what are the things that we're looking out to build, the skills that we're looking to build, the things that we're looking to avoid, everybody should be part of that conversation, because once that session ends or that class finishes or that podcast ends, the real people that are around you that are supporting you are your family members. So if they are educated just like you are and they are in the path of growth and development just like you are, then your support system is also strengthened. So yes, when it comes to attending conferences or lectures or events, your parents should definitely be a part of that, as well as like your potential partner and so on and so forth.
Sister Hina, this has been an incredibly, incredibly informative session. We've really tried to kind of unpack, deconstruct on so many different levels, just in terms of personal development. What is exactly the concept or notion of pre-marital counseling? And even if we dial it back, what is counseling in general, and what does it entail? So with that, we hope we've removed some of the stigma around it. It is a work in progress always. And again, none of this is rehearsed. This is a live stream and it's live as it gets. So Sister Hina, I am going to put it out there that if you are available to do some form of a bi-weekly show or even monthly, in this format, you can do it from your home practice. I'll be here within the studios, or come free to the studios. Feel free to do that, whichever way we do it. But I think there is a certain importance and need within the community, and you've probably seen it within these questions here, for some kind of ongoing show, because this topic is such an important one. And as you so rightfully said, even with all the apps like Half My Deen, we had Ashley and Imran on a past show. We have a regular ongoing show now with Sarah and Imad. I recall, I think they used Half My Deen app. But even with the predominance of these new apps for the newer generation, there is still very much a need all the same to understand, and to understand the self. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put it out there, Sister Hina, if you can make it available, if you can, clear your calendar for some form of a regular show, I'll just leave it with you to kind of get back to us on that. But we'll wrap it up here. The whole purpose of the show is to kind of really address the difficult discussions. And I think this is probably one of the, as you said, Sister Hina, in the beginning, this, marriage is probably the most challenging of all, because there's two people involved. So watch the show, spread the word on the show, just spread the word on the Happy Strong Family kind of podcast series in general, like, subscribe, and all of that. And Sister Hina, how can people contact you, please?
So I do a lot of public speaking, and everywhere that I show up, it's always on my Instagram. So the best way to get a hold of me is just at Hina Mirza. And if you reach out to me, alhamdulillah, I am pretty good about getting in touch with everybody. It might not be right away, but I do reply and I do respond. So just, add me on Instagram. I have a lot of therapy videos that I have been recording and posting. So just to kind of, get you talking about your own mental health and self-reflection and marriage and relationships. So there's a lot of stuff, a lot of content already on there. And then I'm obviously open to answering any questions. Brother Shaq, I am actually thinking of, doing something a little bit more regular, but subhanAllah, everything's in the works. Also, some retreats in the works. I'm planning of self-development, marriage, and whatnot. So just, the best way to stay in touch with me is following me on Instagram, so that you're updated with everything that I'm doing, any events that I'm participating in or speaking at. And then if you are in the area where I am speaking, always feel free to come up and chat with me. I'm always open for a conversation.
Awesome. And we'll end this episode with #MyTherapist. So we'll wrap it up. for producer Kashif, always in the video production booth. Thank you so very much, producer Kashif. Whenever I kind of look this way off camera, it's always to producer Kashif in the production booth. Sister Hina Mirza, thank you so very much for providing this much needed session, this much needed episode. And we look forward to having you on upcoming episodes as well. All right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was trying to say, thank you so much for having me as well. Always a wonderful opportunity, and just lots of gratitude for making it happen that I could be here at my home and speak to you guys all the way there. For sure. All right, then. So we'll wrap it up. Tune in often, because we like to have these challenging discussions. So come back. We do this every Sunday, 11 a.m. Eastern. All right. Signing off for now.